This week on Christian World News, the U.S. military is pulling out of Syria. What will happen to America's allies, the Kurds, and who will protect Christians and other religious minorities? Plus, spiritual independence. Ukraine's Orthodox Church is no longer bound to Russia. The news has them celebrating in the streets. And crackdown in China. President Xi moves to shape society in his image, and that means controlling the church. Welcome to Christian World News, everyone. I'm Wendy Griffith. President Trump shocked the world when he announced he's pulling U.S. troops out of Syria. And one of our closest allies in the region is hoping America won't end its support. CBN contributor Chuck Holton reports from Kurdistan.
U.S. troops may be headed home from Syria, but one important U.S. ally is still there fighting the remnants of ISIS. They're known as the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are predominantly made up of Kurdish fighters known as the Peshmerga. The Kurdish Peshmerga have been fighting ISIS since the beginning, and they've been some of America's staunchest allies in the region. But the latest move by the Trump administration has them worried, because they say there's still plenty of fighting left to do. Masroor Barzani was just nominated to become Kurdistan's prime minister.
I have no doubt that ISIS is going to be militarily defeated. It's just a matter of time. But it will not be eradicated because the ideology will stay. This is a world war, but we are in the front line. But unfortunately, really, we are not being supported to the degree that we need to.
The U.S. has often made it harder for the Peshmerga to fight ISIS because we've sometimes refused to sell them the military equipment they need to do so. This American Humvee now belongs to the Kurdish Peshmerga, but they didn't get it from the United States directly. They got it from ISIS. Now, ISIS got it when the Iraqi army left their equipment and ran away in Mosul back in 2014. So the Kurdish army says, we don't get to pay with dollars if we want to buy American equipment. We have to pay with blood, and that's what they mean. At over 30 million, the Kurdish are the largest people group on the planet without a country of their own. And for generations, they've dreamed of one day having a free Kurdistan. Hoshair Zabari has been fighting for this dream his entire life, and he says a free Kurdistan is an idea whose time has come.
The issue of self-determination for Kurdistan has never been so high by the Kurdish people, that after all this suffering, after all these years, they need a place under the sun also like any other nation. And after ISIS, I think there will be a lot of thinking whether these communities or people can live together or be canned into those borders, or they should have their own free will to decide to see their future.
And with Iran, Syria, and Russia all vying for control in this region, Kurds think this might be a very good place for a permanent U.S. base.
We need Americans to remember that we are loyal friends and loyal allies. We share same principles and same values. We are together against international terrorism as long as it takes. And in this case, to eradicate terrorism and to fight terrorism, there are many ways that we have to work together.
But if the Americans pull out completely, the Kurds will keep fighting, because for them, this fight is about their homeland. Chuck Holton, CBN News, Erbil, Kurdistan.
Thanks, Chuck. When ISIS invaded their villages and towns, many Christians sought refuge in Kurdistan. Earlier, CBN's Charlene Aaron spoke with Ryan Morrow of the Clarion Project. He says a Kurdish state could be a positive development for the region's Christian community.
An independent Kurdish country would be a place where Christians can go for safety if they like living under Kurdish rule, or they could live outside of it, either in Syria that is controlled by Assad and the Iranians, or they could go to a part of Iraq that is dominated by the minorities in an autonomous state, which we also call for. Those of us that study this, we feel that an autonomous province within Iraq just for the minorities is also a step in the right direction.
Okay, and Ryan, what impact will the U.S. pullout have on Christians in Syria and northern Iraq?
It's horrifying. The announcement of the withdrawal from Syria, as well as Afghanistan at a slower pace, has really shaken me to my core. And I would expect a similar drawdown, if not full-out withdrawal, from Iraq as well over the coming couple of years. And that puts the Christians in peril. Because in Syria, you have some Christians that are living under the Assad regime, which isn't great, but they're not facing genocide. Then within the Kurdish-run area of Syria, you do have a Syriac Christian militia that works with the Kurds, works with the Arabs, and is putting out press releases expressing great fear about what comes next. They know that Turkey and its jihadist armies, when they invade Syria, are going to treat those Christians just like the Kurds, which means massacring them, jailing them, persecuting them for sure. And they say that there are about 100,000 Christians in northeastern Syria at risk of Turkish-aligned persecution in the coming months as this withdrawal happens.
That is terrifying. The Kurds are mostly Muslim, yet Kurdistan has been something of a safe haven for Christians and other religious minorities fleeing ISIS. Talk about that.
Sure. Well, the Christian opinion in both Iraq and Syria is divided on the Kurdish issue. So you will hear some reports from Christians of mistreatment at the hands of some Kurds, but that's a far cry from genocide and outright massacres and what they're facing in the rest of Iraq and Syria. Then there are Christians who sing the praises of the Kurds. And when you meet Kurds on the street, as I did in Iraq, they are very proud of their treatment of Christians. They view that as a testament to the fundamental goodness of their people, that they're willing to take in refugees, including Christians. And so the opinion is divided on that question. But overall, the Kurds are really the bright light in those two countries, and as well as in Iran and even Turkey, for the region. As a people, they believe in secular democracy. They are openly and proudly pro-American, and with a whisper, they'll say they're pro-Israel as well. And that is why every jihadist force in the region has to extinguish the Kurds as a people. Because if the Kurds succeed as a secular democracy, as a Muslim people who are at peace with Israel, then are successful on the ground, are wealthy economically, and are advancing socially, then that is truly a threat to the sustainability of radical Islam.
Well, CBN's Operation Blessing is working with Christian refugees in Jordan to help them transition back into normal life. The war in Syria and Iraq became an international refugee crisis as millions of persecuted Christians fled their homes. Operation Blessing is helping Christian families get access to education, health care, food, and vocational training. Teams are providing more than 200 students with quality education and a daily meal. Suffering Christian families now have hope and a place to worship freely. Up next, it's been one of the fastest growing churches in the past 50 years. Now, Christianity in China is under assault. Welcome back. Well, in Eastern Europe, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is affecting one of the oldest churches in the world and millions of Christians. Dale Hurd reports.
Since the late 1600s, the Orthodox Church in Ukraine has been under the wing of the Russian Orthodox Church. Now it's independent of Moscow, after Ukrainian bishops voted to approve a charter for the new church, no longer under the care of the Moscow Patriarch Kirill. This isn't like a church split in America. This is about political power and national rivalries and Vladimir Putin's dream of rebuilding the Russian Empire. When the split was announced in Ukraine, there was a rock concert atmosphere, with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko giving glory to God and saying, "The new united independent Ukrainian church was born today." What kind of church is it? It's a church without Putin. It's a church without Patriarch Kirill. It's a church without prayer for Russian officials and the Russian army. Moscow has vigorously protested Ukraine's bid for spiritual independence, and Russian President Vladimir Putin said, "There's nothing good in it, not for religious freedoms in general." It's a vivid, harsh violation of religious freedoms, and what worries me most is that redistribution of the property will definitely follow. In fact, it's already in full swing and might acquire very hard, if not deadly, features. Some believe Putin's anger over the church split could be why Russian border guards in November rammed into and opened fire on 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels.
It could be connected to what happened just a few weeks ago when this Bartholomew in Istanbul, with a stroke of the pen, took 12,000, a third of all of the churches under the Moscow Patriarch, and gave them to the Ukrainian Patriarch. This created anger in Putin. It's like you lost power over all of these, a third of his parishes.
Fearing war, the Ukrainian parliament imposed martial law and says Russia has massed troops and tanks on its border. But not all in Russia are as upset as Vladimir Putin. This Russian Orthodox believer said, "I don't get involved in it. God will manage everything. We just need to pray." Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Wise words. Well, China's president is cracking down on the country's rapidly growing church there. Recently, authorities arrested a prominent pastor and more than 100 of his church members. As George Thomas reports, it's just the latest move in China's increasing persecution of Christians.
This past Sunday, members of Early Rain Covenant Church were blocked from entering their worship building. With their leaders detained and facing jail, churchgoers decided to pray and worship outside. On December 9th, authorities in the city of Chengdu arrested prominent Christian pastor Wang Yi, along with his wife and 100 members of Early Rain Covenant Church. Authorities shut down the church and charged Pastor Wang with inciting subversion of state power. He and his wife could face up to 15 years in prison if convicted. Early Rain, like scores of other congregations, is outside government control as part of China's burgeoning so-called underground or house church movement. Appearing on CBN News' World Beat, Todd Nettleton of Voice of the Martyrs says this movement has touched every corner of China.
And that's the exciting thing, is all across China there are house churches, there are what they call family churches. And the reason the communist government is so worried is because there are far more Christians in China than there are members of the Communist Party.
Nettleton says Beijing is waging a brutal and widespread crackdown to stop the growth of these unregistered churches.
This crackdown, I think, is a direct response to the fear of the Communist Party leaders, who see the church growing way faster than the party is.
Mr. Yang, has China declared war on Christianity?
Yes.
Fang Gong Wang, a leading expert on religion in China, says what started several years ago as a small government campaign against unregistered churches has turned into all-out war.
The campaign was first experimented in Zhejiang province in 2014 to 2016. Now it has become a nationwide campaign.
A campaign where authorities routinely target houses of worship, destroy crosses, burn Bibles, and arrest pastors. Mr. Fang Gong, who once predicted that China could become the world's largest Christian nation, says the government, headed by Xi Jinping, views Christianity as a threat to the party's long-term political aspirations.
Christians are the remaining NGOs in the shrinking civil society in China. And under Xi Jinping, and the Chinese Communist Party is really trying to establish a totalitarian rule of Chinese society. And the Christians are standing in the way of totalitarianism. So that's why they became a target.
Pictures shared on Early Rain's Facebook page claim to show that police physically abused some of those arrested after they were taken into custody. Foreseeing this possible arrest, Pastor Wang wrote a letter titled "My Declaration of Faithful Disobedience," with instructions that it should be published if he went missing for more than 48 hours. In it, Wang vowed to use non-violent methods to stand against Chinese laws he believed were against the Bible and God. My Savior Christ also requires me to joyfully bear all costs for disobeying wicked laws, Wang wrote. I am filled with anger and disgust at the persecution of the church by this communist regime, at the wickedness of their depriving people of the freedoms of religion and of conscience. Wang is no stranger to authorities. He was once one of China's most prominent civil rights lawyers and intellectuals. In 2005, he had an encounter with Jesus Christ and decided to convert to Christianity. He gave up his law career to pursue his calling as a pastor and started Early Rain in China's Sichuan province. His sermons, many of them widely circulated on social media, soon made him a rising star and an important player in the Christian revival that was sweeping China. All that has come to a screeching halt with his arrest and the closure of the church. Still, members of his congregation vowed to keep meeting despite the risk of arrest. George Thomas, CBN News.
Thanks, George. Up next, meet the Gouda nuns and find out what secret ingredient makes their product a sellout. And welcome back to Christian World News. It's a business model you won't see anywhere else. 13 nuns who make cheese, and they sell out every year. So what's their secret ingredient? We sent our Heather Sells to a Virginia monastery to find out.
This is the heart of this cloistered Trappist nun community, gathering for worship and prayer 7 times a day, starting at 3:15 in the morning. And this is the cheese barn, where the 13 sisters at Our Lady of the Angels make 20,000 pounds of Gouda every year. Most of their $250,000 business is mail order, although some local shops drive out monthly for the cheese their customers crave.
The flavor's great. It's on the mild end in terms of intensity, but it's delicious and really versatile. You can use it for cooking, or you can just nosh it with salami and olives and bread.
When they started, the nuns knew nothing about how to make cheese. Today, they literally cannot keep up with the demand from food connoisseurs around the country.
It sort of sells itself. People get it as a gift, and they call and they say, could I order some of this cheese?
Sister Barbara is one of the original 6 who was sent by a large monastery in Massachusetts to start anew on this gorgeous piece of land near Charlottesville, Virginia. The goal, follow the centuries-old rules of St. Benedict by building a life based on prayer and engage in manual labor to support themselves. Happily for the sisters, the property they bought already featured a cheese-making facility.
We were so naive, we thought it'd be so simple. You have some of this equipment here, and you just get some milk and a few lessons and just make some cheese.
But the sisters persevered, and they got it right, really right. They allot 32 days a year to make the Gouda, and everyone pitches in. Sister Maria is the designated cheese cook. The 35-year-old from Spain must manipulate some 6,000 pounds of pasteurized milk with a little culture and rennet into several hundred wheels of cheese. It looks easy, but like any good recipe, it's all about precision, getting the correct temperature, cutting the curds at just the right moment, eating them, then draining the whey, and finally pressing the cheese. Over the years, the sisters have not only perfected their technique, they've never bungled a batch. That's almost unheard of. Sister Linda is sidelined from the cheesemaking with an injury right now, but says her fellow sisters' attention to detail is key.
A big part of it has been their openness to learning and their absolute dedication to doing it better.
The sisters say prayer is also a big part of their work, from making the cheese to shipping it out.
While I'm doing it, I'm really praying for the people who are gonna eat that cheese. I mean, I know every family, every person have problems.
For every 5 cheese orders that come in the mail, at least one, maybe out of every 4, one will have a request for prayers.
Prayer is also the reason the nuns say they won't grow their business.
People will come in and say, well, you sold out last year, so you're going to make more next year, aren't you? The priority is not the cheese.
That's not why we're here.
What is happening here? A seeking after the Lord that is visibly discernible.
It's fun to see the nuns, and they're so, kind and calm and mellow. It sort of slows you down a little bit.
People come to the door, come to buy cheese. They always want to know a little bit about our way of life, so we tell them. And then we ask them if they'd like to stop in the chapel for a moment.
When they're not in the chapel or making the cheese, the nuns do admit to eating it, often. And there is a preferred method.
My favorite way to have it is on a piece of toast for breakfast.
If you toast a piece of bread so that the bread is kind of crispy, and then you put a couple thin slices of cheese on, put it in the microwave for 25 seconds.
So what's next for the sisters? No cheddar or Havarti, they say. It's strictly Gouda. As for their numbers, it's clear a new generation is needed sometime soon. But these women believe if they remain true to their calling, God will replenish their ranks in His time.
We are here together because God called us here one way or another. We all followed what we perceived to be God's call to us individually. We never knew each other before, so it's not a coincidence, but part of a larger plan that remains a mystery.
It is a beautiful, holy mystery that's unfolding here as the sisters seek out God and find ways to minister through simple 2-pound wheels of cheese. Reporting in Crozet, Virginia, Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, 2018, it's just about over, and all of us here at Christian World News want to wish you and your family a very happy new year and pray you'll know God's comfort, leading, and care in deeper ways in 2019. So until next year, goodbye, and as always, God bless you.